I'd sold, I would remember that, or lack thereof houses. I remember every house I've ever sold.
Why is it every time we start the podcast, Jeff's mouth is going? He's like that one kid in my class in third grade that just did not shut up. I'm just kidding. I'm joking. No, this is the funny stuff we like to throw in the front. Uh-huh. I will say, I didn't tell you
illegal, by the way.
What's that? What's illegal?
$165,000 house, raise the sales price to $170,000, and then put the $5,000 in your pocket.
Hey, let's hold that thought. That's a good topic, and I'm going to dispute that. It could be illegal, but not necessarily. It depends on how it's handled.
It depends on what it appraises.
That's
for,
right?
right?
You're listening to It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere Real Estate Podcast. Brett Bernard, Marissa Miller, Jeff McNett, Nick Gibson, jackass producer Richard, and again with us is
Joe Garner. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you back, Joe. No, I mean, Richard and I have known each other now for 7 years. Too long? Too long, of course. One day is too long. And we have a going joke. He's a palmy Brit, and he calls me Coon-ass. So we do have a history of working at a different company and doing some things together. So it's all in fun. I don't really hate Richard, so don't get your panties in a wad.
You hope so. So you didn't mean to discriminate against.
I brought him on the boat once before, but his kids were there, so I wasn't going to throw him overboard.
So you didn't mean to discriminate.
You want to do that in front of his kids.
So you weren't discriminating against British people. You were just
I can't stand
kidding
British
around
people.
with Richard. Okay.
I can't stand him.
I waved goodbye to him.
Crappy food. Crappy food. Palmy, peachy,
bland food,
white skin,
blandest food in the world.
They talk funny.
Do you know why?
Probably why they live to be 95 years old instead of 70.
Me and Layla were just talking about this at lunchtime. Layla's my wife. We were talking about, a lot of Americans go to the UK and think the food's bland, but it's mainly because there is a lot of seasoning on food here. And when you use less seasoning like they do at high-class restaurants, you obviously can't taste it.
Oh yeah, well, whether you like to taste it or not.
That sounds like a completely made-up BS story about a guy from Britain talking about our food.
Well, however you like the taste of it or not, the food's better for you in most parts of the world.
It is.
Because
I'm sure
we just eat.
They're healthier over there.
They feed us junk here. I think America makes us sick on purpose just so they can, fulfill the pharmaceutical lobby in the healthcare industry.
Okay, so we're going to get into a topic about how you can limit your out-of-pocket cash on a purchase when dealing with a buyer, especially if you're getting a mortgage. If it's a cash deal, you can still do that if you want. But if you get that kind of cash, you're not really worried about a couple $1,000s. So stick around. We'll be right back.
We are sponsored by Title Assurance and Escrow, a title company here in Cordova that does all of our closings, title work, escrows, and we only use Title Assurance and Escrow. That relationship is very important because we can get things done for our investors quickly and easily. So to speak with Title Assurance and Escrow, call 901-737-3332. Ask for Chris or April.
All right, welcome back, Joe. We're going to talk about some examples of how me as a buyer, if I decide I want to buy a rental property, I've got $20,000 in the bank. The house is $120,000. And I've got to come up with, 20% down, and I'm going to be about $8,000 or $9,000 short at the closing table. And I just don't have the extra money, can't borrow it. I got to be able to pay my closing costs and everything that's required of me to do this. What would you think would be a good way to bring more cash to the table, but it's not coming out of my pocket? You said 3 letters earlier, reminding me of an old rap song back in the 80s. It said OPP is OPM, which stands for
other people's money.
There you go.
Yeah. You said they can't borrow anymore, but in this scenario, however, some of the common scenarios that I see from the mortgage desk for investors, now, most of your mortgage products will not allow a gift. They limit how much the seller is allowed to pay for that investor's closing cost. Most of them limit it to 2%, but I've noticed on some of the newer DSCR loans, they don't really have that strict of a limit. They will even go up to 6% of the sales price that the seller can pay for investment property. So there you go. And if the seller is looking at what they're going to net out, and you're selling the house for, $200,000, and you're asking them to pay 2%, then maybe if the house will appraise for more, you could raise the price up by that 2% so that the seller can afford at closing to pay the 2% to help that
and you
investor.
do always run the risk it doesn't appraise for that little bit bumped up number. And we do a lot of deals like this. Mm-hmm. Our builders, especially on new construction, you give them $165 for the house. They agree to give you a $5,000 builder credit at closing. So that means what? $5,000 less is coming out of your pocket when you go to close.
Right.
I get often asked, well, why wouldn't you just lower the price to $160? Well, there's a good reason behind that. So if I got a builder that's going to build 20 homes in an area, he doesn't want to kill his next home's value by selling this one for $160.
Exactly.
So he's going to sell it at $165, give you the $5,000 at closing, and when it's recorded as a $165,000 sale. Now his next build, his baseline is $165. Now he can pump that next one to $167 and then $168. And that's how a lot of builders and developers build up their values and set those comps for themselves to continue doing what they're doing.
And back to OPM, other people's money. So let's say that the house didn't appraise for the extra amount. So now the seller's like, hey, I can't pay your closing costs because I can't get this higher price for the house because the appraiser says it's not worth that, let's say. Okay, well, other places that we look and we see investors go for money is maybe they'll pull a little on the equity line that they have secured on their primary residence. Right. Most of them don't like to do that, but if they're in a pinch, they'll do it. If it's not a large amount, they'll pull on an equity line on their current house. You can borrow that money. It's not unsecured money. It's secured, and that's another thing. You can't borrow unsecured. Can't get a gift. So, but your home equity line's secured on your primary residence. So that's a nice little place to go to get
pick up some extra
money.
Cash.
Okay, another place. I have one investor he borrows against his 401k. Now, he'll borrow against it, and then he'll flip something, and he'll pay all of that back. So he says, hey, I only use this for emergencies, and every time I sell a house or make a profit, I'm going to pay this off because I want it to be available to me the next time I need to pull secured money.
He's borrowing from himself, and you can do that without any penalty, correct?
Joe, right, and most of the time without a payment. Most of the time without a payment.
Joe, let's go back to gift for a minute. I'm $2,000 short of my down payment. I call you up 2 days later, I've got the money. How do you know my father didn't give it to me, my sister-in-law?
Right. Oh, that's such a good question, Jeff.
I'm not going to tell you where I got it. I have the rest of the money.
Well, it depends on who is actually doing the loan, because who has the gold makes the rules, as you know. So whoever is funding that loan makes the rules on what they're going to allow on the loan. But most of the DSCRs, not all, and all of your traditional loans that you get through the government are going to want to verify any large deposits that suddenly appear. And they're going to make sure that it wasn't borrowed money, or in the case of you being an investor, they want to make sure it's not a gift. Now, if you're buying a primary residence, you can use gifts.
Well, let me reword that for you real quick. I didn't borrow the money from Nick. Nick didn't give me the money. Nick is my business partner, and we've just created a $150 LLC online, so that's where the other money came from.
Right. Well,
yay or nay?
I'm not the one to make the call. It's a fair question, but my job
Brett
is
said
a
get
mortgage
creative.
officer.
I'm just trying to get
No, that is creative. It really depends on whether the underwriter's a Nazi or not. A lot of them are.
We document it, we turn it in, and we have pretty good underwriters that are common sense underwriters. On a traditional loan, if you did an investment property through like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, they're going to be really strict on where does that extra $2,000 come from. DSCRs, they do have their rules and regulations per program, but some of them aren't so strict on a small amount like that.
Right. I'm just curious.
So, and would you, let me ask you this, so would you give that advice to someone if they come to you and say, Joe, I want to buy this rental property. How much do I need to put down? You say, okay, you're going to need $25,000. They're like, oh, crap, I only got 21. Well, would the advice to that person be, well, let's go back to the builder or the seller who's making $30,000 on a house, and go to him and say, would you be willing to give him a $4,000 closing credit to make up the difference? And would that be allowable? Because, that builder would much rather take $26,000 home than zero.
I agree. As long as you're within the limits on whatever that loan product has, like some DSCR products, like your traditional Fannie and Freddie, they say seller can't give more than 2% of the sales price toward closing. But now some of these DSCR products, I've noticed last night I was looking at one, it's 6%.
Yeah.
So that that covers a lot, 6%.
Well, Joe, let me ask you a question. So guy needs 29,000. He's only got 21. Builder won't do what Brett just asked him to do. That deal falls apart. We're back to square one. Can you, professionally, legally, or whatever, advise that client, hey, maybe we should look at a smaller property that only requires a $20,000 down payment? Can you give that person that kind of advice, or no?
Well, first of all, just to be fair, we're using hypothetical stories here.
Yeah.
But most of the products that involve investments, they're going to want, not only are they going to want that person to have enough money to close, but they're going to want money in reserves. Now, traditionally, what we do is for reserves, we'll use an IRA or some type of instrument that they're not going to want to pull money out of anyway.
401k or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
because we're just going to show, well, in an emergency, if they needed to, they could take that
In other
amount
words, you don't
out.
have to liquidate your 401k.
Well, that
just
would
just
seem
pull
like
a statement
that would
and show
just
that
seem
I've
like-
got 50 grand set in a 401k.
That would
I
seem
could
like the
access if I
simplest
needed.
thing to do. You know, I'm looking at buying a $180,000 investment property. I have probably a little bit more than I need to chew off from our first one. Brett, show me some $140,000.
No, I just did that. I mean, we
now
just went through that.
I've got my $20,000 down payment, and I've got $10,000 in my savings account.
Okay, and so
Now,
another story is somebody they'll sell something. They'll sell their jet skis and their other things. I have to show a bill of sale. I have to show that it was sold for a normal
Right.
appraised value for that item. I've had people do that, or one fella said, you know what, I'm going to bring my dad in on this one. Now, they were short more than $8,000. And Dad is going to, we're going to use his money, because now it's not a gift, because Dad's on the loan with the son.
Right. Okay.
All right. Well, let me pose this
But if you're
question.
going to go into all this,
I'm going to
you're-
find a way to make it work.
if you're
Now,
going
I'm
to
not
go,
a financial advisor.
if you're going to
so-
go into all this on the front end as a buyer, investor, whatever, maybe you should get all your ducks in a row and figure out what you're getting into, or get
Well,
get
that's
some
what I do.
information
Yeah.
from you,
Yes.
and then go back and talk to Dad, and Dad dumps $30,000 into my account to do this. If it's all pre-existing before we've made application for a loan,
Right.
it's
Like
it's
30
my money, not my
30
dad's
days
money.
old, 60 days
Yeah.
old, depending on the product.
It needs
And
to have
that's
some
another
seasoning. It
thing.
just can't
They'll
show up
just
the day
put the
before.
money in there and
There
let
you
it
go.
season. Then it's his.
Yeah, okay.
Good
Okay.
point.
Well, Joe, let me ask you this question, and because I really don't know the answer to this. So let's say we're in this situation, and the guy needs $3,000. We've used a builder credit, and the guy has no more access to pick up that $3,000 additional that he needs. Are closing cost, attorney's fees, and all that on the HUD, are those considered gifts from the seller if they just cover that? If they agree to cover all closing costs, no differentiating between buyer and seller, are those considered a gift,
Wow.
a contribution, or is it just part of the deal?
I've never had anybody ask me that question.
I mean, I've thought about it. It's just I get the prepays and insurance and your down payment and all that stuff. But if you're dealing with attorney's fees, tax stamps, title work, and all that stuff, and the seller says, I'm paying all that, then
Well,
would that be considered a gift?
I don't know. How's that for a very definite answer?
That's an honest answer.
Well, isn't
I
that
don't
something
know.
to what you're asking? Isn't that something that the title company attorney would work out? He would know. I mean,
Not necessarily.
what I mean, if I'm
Because like she
if
said,
I'm,
it comes down to the lender and the
if
underwriter
I'm a
and what the
seller,
rules
I'm
are.
going to contribute 2% towards your closing costs. That goes nothing but closing costs, but in those closing costs are attorney fees, title searches, and all that.
Well, that's
So
my
isn't it kind of
point.
up to the title company to legally determine what the seller can pay for and what they can't?
That's
Do
my
they just
question.
bundle
Is
it all
a
into the
$5,000
2%?
builder? Let's say the builder puts an ad out there and says, all my homes are $165, $5,000 builder credit across the board. If he's advertised that publicly, is the bank going to see that as a contribution from the builder? Or are they going to just say that was just a promotional discount and it really doesn't apply to the gift part or the
Wow, I would think that it would be a concession in the eyes of an underwriter.
even if he's giving it to every single person that buys one of his houses?
Correct.
It's just a standard across the board $5,000 a house
Correct.
back.
It is a concession.
Promotion. Okay.
However, I'm thinking about your other question. It may, and again, I'm going to say I don't know, but it may be that if your attorney sends over a fee sheet that where he has a huge cost for the seller side for closing fee, but maybe they don't charge as much for owner's title, or maybe they don't charge as much for their closing fee, if any, for the buyer. That may help.
You get the title attorney, bump up the seller's fees, and
I don't know, but I would think that would be the first.
Well, that would be dishonest.
I mean, would an underwriter look at a HUD and be like, "Well, why is the seller paying $10,000 in closing and the buyer's paying $0?"
Right. I don't know.
That would just be dishonest.
Somehow they would have to show that.
It would have to be disclosed.
Yeah.
That's the key. You got to disclose everything.
Which is going back to your previous one. I said we'll get into that. Glenn always said, it doesn't really matter what you do. If you disclose it, you've covered your backside,
True.
right? And that's
then
the
it's
key.
up to an underwriter.
If you don't disclose to a bank that something's going on outside of closing, it could be considered bank fraud. You could get in trouble for that. But if you disclose it and they miss it or don't disagree with it, then you're covered.
Right.
So
that's something we could try.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, are you going to come visit me in federal penitentiary?
Well, not if you
bank fraud?
disclose it. We'll have to make sure the
Can you
underwriter
put some money in my
sees all of
commissary
that.
account so I can get some Cheetos and some soda?
I'll bring you a strawberry cake with a file
Thank
in
you.
it.
All right, here's a creative way to get your down payment down. So I'm $4,000. I'm a brand new young investor. I'm $4,000 shy. Well, you're just going to get on the horn to City of Memphis down payment assistance program. You're going to get my $4,000.
But they're not going to do a down payment assistance program for an investor.
That's discriminatory.
Says who?
Says the Constitution, I guess. I don't have it Constitution in front of me. That's discriminatory.
I will say this. There is no way in the world a bank's ever going to treat an investor and a homeowner any way, shape, or form alike.
It's discriminatory.
What is rules for a homeowner is going to be completely different for an investor.
Well, what if? Let me ask you this: stupidest question of the day. Everybody goes and buys a home on an FHA conventional loan, and they go to closing and sign all those papers that you sent over to them from the lender's office.
Right.
And one of those papers somewhere, it says that I agree to occupy this house and not sublet it or lease it to anybody and blah, blah, blah for X amount of time.
Well,
what is that all about?
Okay, well,
what if I'm an investor and just took out a FHA loan on
you're
a house
talking
and I put a renter in it?
You're talking about a
Does
down
the word
payment
bank
assistance.
fraud mean anything?
You're talking about a down payment assistance program if you said you can't sublet it. But
no,
now
that was a different question.
Okay, so you do sign, if you're going to occupy it, you're going to sign a document that says, I'm going to occupy this property. The general expectation of lenders is that you're going to occupy it for at least a year, for real, is your primary residence. If there's no other clauses in there, like it's not a down payment assistance program where you're agreeing to live there for X number of years, let's just say it's a straight FHA loan, and you've lived there, you've changed your mailing address, you're living in there as your primary residence. After a year, your life situation changes. There's no expectation that you have to live in there longer than that.
Okay, so it's just for a year.
Right.
But you can't put in an application with FHA intentionally knowing you're never going to live there. You're buying as an investment property.
You have to occupy within 60 days of closing.
So no down payment assistance, back to the other question, for an investor.
No.
Right. I don't know of any.
And no
now, another place.
No discriminatory claim.
I've never seen a bank or a state or a federal government agency give any investors any down payment assistance for anything.
So the government discriminates against poor investors.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Another place.
They just have to change their strategy at that point. Then you look at, maybe you have to go hard money to purchase, rehab it, and then refi out of it and get most of your cash back.
I've done refinances on another property they own to give them the cash out that they need, or they've gotten a credit line. Sometimes it's a temporary credit line secured on a different property in order to meet that. You said $5,000, you're off a cash value and a life insurance. Sometimes I ask that and they look at me like, what? I'm like, do you have a whole life policy? How long have you had it? No, but my parents bought me one when I was little. I said, well, how much is it worth? Oh, it's worth $5,000. Well, maybe you can get some money out of that. So you got to know where to sink your spade to hit gold.
But y'all's advice would be, if I took out $30,000 equity loan out of
take your wife on vacation,
personal house.
That's my advice.
And I went out and flipped a house and made $50,000 on it. Your best advice would be to pay the equity loan off, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, listen, the key to cash flowing and making money in real estate is eliminating the debt service, right? Every corporation out there has one thing on their P&L that they put out which dictates the price of their stock and profit and all that, and that is their debt service. That's huge. Treat a rental property the same way. If you got debt service against it, your cash flow's half or less. It's 30 or 40% less. As soon as you pay off the debt service, guess what? Your cash flow goes up $400 or $500 a month. That's what you want to get to. But you're never going to get there if you do some of these other
that's
crazy
when you
ideas.
were talking earlier,
Yeah.
earlier episode, 35, 40% ROI.
Yeah, I mean, if you pay it down,
Now you're living off the cash flow. We advise you not to live off the cash flow getting started
Correct.
out, but
Right.
now that everything's
I guarantee
paid
you,
for.
if people actually kept records well enough, and they took a house they bought 15 years ago that's just finally been paid off, is rent for $1,500 a month, and went through every receipt, and this is exactly what I put into this property. The rest of it came from the tenant, came from insurance, whatever. But that's what I put into it. And then equate out the cash you made on it, the equity growth you got. I bet you would have returns that people would look at you and think you've been smoking crack. Because if you do it right, it's not hard to see a doubling of your investment over the next 10 years.
Right.
And tripling and quadrupling of it over the next 15 to 20 years. If you manage your property and you manage the cash flow and you manage your shit fund and you do the right job as an investor.
Yeah, I would say the poop fund needs to be a
can say poop fund.
a real priority, because even in my own history of owning real estate, I like to have that poop fund, because there are things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to have to fix, and there's going to be some things that are nothing. There's going to be some things that are like, oh wow, now it all hit me at one time. But when you have that emergency fund, there's no stress. You just take care of it and you go on. And the good thing I always say personally about real estate, is that where are you going to find an investment that historically goes up in value and the income historically goes up in value? I say historically because sometimes you're going to see, ebbs and flows, but mostly, at least in this area, we've seen it go up. And, I buy stocks and bonds. Okay. So bonds may give me an income. They're not, but they're not going to give me that much growth. Stocks may grow. They're not going to give me much income. Real estate is a beautiful thing because it traditionally goes up in value, giving me growth and equity, but it also traditionally goes up in income. Where are you going to find that?
Well, that's what attracts most of our investors to Memphis, what you just alluded to with, stable, no major ups and downs,
Right.
just steady as she goes, stable.
So I've got a quick question about the HELOC. How far in advance do I need to establish that HELOC so that it's not damaged my credit so much that my DSCR rate isn't going to be that great?
Only unlicensed
Well, that's a
person in the
question that
room
I
asked the
don't
most
know the
intelligent
exact
question of the
answer,
day.
but I know a general answer for you. Whenever you have a hard hit to your credit, it is going to have a small effect. In fact, the myfico.com says about 10% effect, unless you've gone out and done a bunch of them. And another thing I would say about a home equity line, that's a revolving variable rate. That's going to score based on what percentage of that credit line you've actually used, assuming you make the payments on time. So if you want to keep your credit scores high, of course, make your payments on time, but never borrow more than 30% of whatever your credit limit is. So if you've got a $10,000 credit limit, you would never, ever want to use more than $3,000 on the equity line. If you need more than $3,000, then get a credit limit for more than $10,000. So you can always keep your usage low, and that boost your scores, and that can affect it by about 30% on your credit score.
Well, Joe, thanks again for hanging out with us the
Thank
third
you.
time. And we got 3 out of 4 ain't bad, right? If you want to reach out to us, 901-692-7401, mymemphisinvestmentproperties.com. And Joe, how can they get in touch with you? Because here's all this crap we keep talking about, just call Joe. Call Joe, and then your next call is to us.
We'll take a test drive on some mortgage products and see what feels best for you, what's going to fit you best on your investment. I'm Joe Garner in the mortgage business. Pick up the book, Choosing the Best Mortgage, the Quickest Way to the Life You Want, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Connect with me at jogarner.com.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joe. And everybody have a great day. See you next time.
For more common sense real estate tips, listen and subscribe at 5o'clocksomewherepodcast.com. The 5 O'Clock Somewhere Real Estate Investor Podcast is a Sound Ideas Group production. Investor Podcast is a Sound Ideas Group production.